Right now, we welcome actually a very good friend of mine and our former news director from how many years ago was it?
So I was thinking about that, actually doing the math last night. Yeah. I started here 40 years ago.
Right.
And walked out of here 30 years ago.
Uh-huh. Well, thanks for coming in this morning.
No problem.
We did the same thing last year, but it's a
fascinating topic.
It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. So tell us about this demon case here.
Yeah, so it was. It's a story that went nationwide, and it's because it happened 39 years ago. This murder in Brookfield. I mean, the people listening to you today who weren't even born, don't know anything about it, and other people who I have found who have lived in Brookfield pretty much their whole life who kind of forget about this. But At the time, it was huge. Dick Clark, the famous,
right.
New Year's Eve Dick Clark guy, did a made-for-TV movie that aired on NBC. And back in those days, in 1983, NBC had what they called the Movie of the Week. It's played Sunday night at 9 p.m., and it was aired nationwide, and they did the Demon Murder Case. And so this was a nationwide story. I was feeding radio networks around the country. In fact, internationally, there was interest in this. Because you're dealing with the supernatural. People have a fascination with this. And I should say alleged supernatural, all right? But because that's the topic, people find it interesting.
Sure.
And so it kind of catapults into a different sphere of level of interest. So we had people coming in from Australia, to film here. And it was just insane. At the time. But I mean, the facts of the case are actually pretty straightforward. It was,
right.
It was a murder case. 19-year-old Arnie Cheyenne Johnson stabbed to death his 41-year-old landlord, Alan Bono.
And
it happened 523 Federal Road.
Right. Where the kennels are now.
Where Marta's, I forget what's the full name of it, but Canine Resort, I think it is.
Right.
That used to be called Brookfield Kennels. Alan Bono, who's a single guy at 41, owned it, operated it. And there's some apartments on the property, just a few, like 3 or 4 of them. And one of the apartments was inhabited at that point by Debbie Glatzel, age 26 at the time. Her family lived in Brookfield. And her 19-year-old boyfriend, Arnie Cheyenne Johnson, who came from Bridgeport but then was living there. He was a tree surgeon. He'd leave during the day, go and climb trees, cut down limbs.
Right.
She would stay at the kennels, groom dogs, and I guess they got a reduction in rent or something like that. She was working off the rent that way. Alan and Arnie, they all went out that day. Arnie took a day off from work. His 3 younger sisters, and they're like around 10 years old, all came up from Bridgeport. They went out to lunch at a restaurant that's, for those who know the area, near Stu Leonard's in Danbury.
Okay,
there's a restaurant there. I spoke to the waitress who served them. She had to cut them off. They were drinking so much at lunch.
Right.
By the end of the day, Alan was just over the moon drunk. The autopsy, I think the numbers came back at 0.341.
Whoa.
Yeah. He was out of control drunk. Arnie had been drinking as well. I think he was 0.1 something in the arrest records. But what happened then, I don't know what happened during the afternoon, but then Debbie went out to get some pizza. She came back. Alan was getting quite belligerent. According to everybody, who talked. And so there was an argument. It goes out into the parking lot. So if you drive by Federal Road by Marta's and you see that parking lot, this is exactly where it happened. It was right there. Arnie pulled out a knife, stabbed Alan 5 times. Knife was found 25 feet away from the body, and he took off. Now, Alan... later on, because this story does get weird, all right? So I'm going to flip around a little bit,
okay.
But at the trial, when the coroner testified, he said that the 4 stab wounds measured out to a perfect rectangle in his torso, and that they were almost surgical in nature, in that it was almost like a scalpel that is gone sort of like in like this. And the thing was, the little sisters had a story that there was a knife flying through the air.
Wow.
And that they didn't see Arnie stab him. And so later they recanted that testimony, and there was a lot of allegation that they were put up to it to try and make this even more bizarre than it was already. But Alan was, rushed to the hospital. He died about an hour later at 7:35. And this was February 16th, 1981. About an hour later, they picked up Arnie walking on, locally, if you know it, Silver Mine Road, near the Glatzel house at the time, by the way. There's some thought he was headed back there. but who knows? Anyway, so he was arrested, held on a $125,000 bond. They went through the court proceedings, and he got convicted ultimately on manslaughter. But the interesting part was they tried to introduce in a court of law in Connecticut for the first time, not guilty by reason of demonic possession. And then when you start to peel back the onion on this story and look at all the different things that were going on, there was just bizarre allegations. And it really tended to focus around the Glatzel's young son, who was at the time 11 or 12 years old, who was having, and I know we're going to play some of the audio from this before that, later, that was taped at the time by Ed and Lorraine Warren, the demonologist and the clairvoyant from Monroe, Connecticut, who got involved with this. They were with the Amityville horror case. They got brought into it. And the weird part, I think, for me about this story was, okay, it's a murder case. Could have been an argument over Debbie, there could be some jealousy there. Could have been just a drunken rage. It could have been, who knows, but it got out of control, obviously, and somebody got stabbed. The problem is that in the months leading up to this, starting the previous July, there were some things that the family was claiming had happened. Debbie Glatzel and I spoke quite a few times, and Lorraine Warren and I, and Ed Warren, I was at their house, the Warrens' house in Monroe, and that's where I got this tape. They made me, let me have a copy of it to play. The problem was that Debbie said that this little boy was demonically possessed. Her little brother was demonically possessed. The Bridgeport Diocese, the Catholic Church, was involved. I spoke to the demonologist, Father Francis Virgilac, who was at, I think it's Villa Maria in Stamford. Spoke with Father Greco, who's the communications guy, or was in those days, for the diocese. And what they said was there's two types of exorcisms, right? There's the lower level one and then the real serious one. And the serious one is called a ritual Romano. And the other one, if you are familiar with the Christian prayer, the Lord's Prayer, there's a line in there that says, deliver us from evil. Well, deliver is the lower exorcism. And so that's like get rid of the devils. There were three, call them what you will, supposed events that occurred. One at a Roman Catholic, according to the Warrens, there was an event that happened at a Roman Catholic church, a convent nearby, which I believe was St. Joseph's Church in Brookfield, and then something at their house. And the audio tape supposedly was made during one of these events when David was having this episode. And when you hear it, it's an unusual, bizarre sounding tapes, to be sure. So maybe just play part of.
Go ahead.
Okay. Here's that clip.
So this is at one of the exorcisms.
The cross is on his heart. Put that right on him.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Watch out, Dave.
And that's it for the clip.
Yeah, so what you were hearing there was some of the background of the people. That's not the most explosive one. We'll do that one a little later in the morning.
Okay.
But the point is that there was clearly, the poor David Glatzel was obviously going through something, and it was a lot of us found it kind of curious that this was being brought into it. But what the allegation was that at the second exorcism, that if you talk to people who focus on demonology, they will tell you one thing you never do is you don't challenge the devil. And so Arnie, at this second event, whatever it was, you hear it on the tape saying, take me on, leave this boy and take me on. So Debbie told me that was the point when her boyfriend Arnie then became possessed.
The transition happened.
Yeah. And so from that time on, things got even weirder. There were claims that David was able to predict the future of some horrible things were going to happen, and she even insinuated that he had said there might be a murder. Well, the Brookfield police were called in, so there's records that all this stuff, the church had been involved, the schools had been involved, the police had been involved, and it was, around this family issue. But then this murder happened, and so this propels it now into the general public.
Right.
And from there, it just took on a life of its own, and we can talk maybe about the movie a little bit more, too.
Yeah, this is great stuff.
People often ask me with the Brookfield, the Devil Made Me Do It case, so what weird happened to you. And it's not so much what happened to me, it was things that people said to me that were bizarre. So I got in touch with one of the priests who was at, the exorcisms.
Where was the exorcism?
So
At the church?
one was and again, I'm just telling you what I heard. I have no firsthand knowledge. It was not at any of these things, but one was supposedly, according to Ed Warren, in my notes, was at a Roman Catholic church. I don't know which one. One was at a quote-unquote convent near the Glatzel home, which would probably be St. Joe's in Brookfield. And the third one was supposedly at the Glatzel home. So that's what I was told.
3 exorcisms?
Yeah. Now, again, this is the lower exorcism, supposedly.
Okay.
Now, the Bridgeport, when I got in touch with the Bridgeport diocese, they never confirmed that this was held. What they said was they were trying to provide, comfort to the family. When I talked to one of the priests who participated in one of these, I said, look, there are people out here saying that there's, devil running around Brookfield, and I just would like to be able to go on air and say, look, this is nothing here, folks, going back to your lives, right? And what he told me was, he said, if this goes to court and we are compelled to testify, you will have plenty to write about.
Oh, boy.
And so what does that mean? Now, it sounds very dramatic.
That means you didn't get the answer you want.
Well, that was
you didn't get
one.
to go on the air and say, hey, the devil's not in Brookfield.
Yeah, so that was number one. And then I also, if you go back to the what the heck is the name of the movie? The Demon Murder Case, because I always get mixed up. It's not The Devil in Connecticut. That's the book. The Demon Murder Case, if you ever watch that, and you can see it online, it shows a scene of a Brookfield police officer walking up to the house, and of course everybody's fake names. I'm in the movie. Ken Kercheval played me, so I don't know if anybody remembers Dallas.
Oh yeah,
they show Dallas. Ken Kercheval played Cliff Barnes in Dallas. Well, he played me in this movie, and my name in the movie was Richard Clarion.
You didn't like your portrayal, did you?
I did not like the portrayal. No. That's because just tell the full story there. So William Kelly was the screenwriter, and he came to Brookfield. And there was basically me and Ruth Lockwood from the News Times, the late, great Ruth Lockwood.
Right.
Loved her. She was great. Ruthie and I had, like a friendly competition, as reporters sometimes do, and you try and, get news that maybe the other one doesn't have. And, that's kind of part of the game, but you got to be responsible doing that. Ruth was great. And William Kelly knew that she and I were the two who were really doing the coverage on this, so he approached both of us and offered to bring us out to Hollywood to be script consultants for the film. And so I was listening to his proposal, and it was really meaning I was going to have to let out everything I knew. And some people had told me some things in really deep confidence, and to this day I don't share that information because it's just not right. Ruth took the script consultancy, went out to Hollywood, and when we saw the movie air on NBC in 1983, I was like, son of a gun. So that's what happens when you don't share all your information they portrayed.
What did they do, turn you into an a-hole?
They turned me into something I would prefer not to admit. That's what that was. So anyway, that was the case there. But so I spoke to that Brookfield police officer. He's now passed on. And he told me that some of what was in that movie was true.
Wow.
That he saw some stuff. And now, what he saw in specifics, he didn't want to get into it. He did say that, the police were asked to kind of bring the blue curtain down on this, and because it wasn't good reputation for the town, nobody was asked to lie, but it was just like, let's not go out there and talk about what you saw.
So on paper, initially, it all starts out as a pretty straightforward murder case.
It's a murder case.
Drunk people, a murder case, here are the facts, and then you get to court, and then all of this stuff.
So witnesses, I have actually with me the original press release from the Brookfield Police Department that says witnesses saw him pull out a knife. Then they said, no, we didn't see it. Then they said the knife was flying through midair. These poor little girls who I suspect probably were coached in their testimony.
Right.
They later recanted. And, so I think he got a garden variety, if there is such a thing, kind of a garden variety stab murder case. And, which because of the involvement of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were masterful at getting
drama, high drama.
Well, this is a topic that unnerves a lot of people.
Yeah.
And in fact, I don't know if you want to play this other clip.
Oh, I sure do.
Yeah, let's play the other clip, and then we'll hold it there and come back.
Dad, you want something? Dad, he's right near the door. David, stop.
So that was David Glatzel.
That's allegedly was David Glatz.
Okay.
I wasn't there. I got a copy of the tape.
Oh, that's right.
So that's what I was told by Ed Warren, who let me make a copy of the tape. They did this, and they're not here to defend themselves, but they did this under the category of, they wanted to document everything. So they took Polaroid photos, and they had tape recorders going. Told the people what to say, during an exorcism, what you're supposed to say, and sweet Jesus, leave this boy alone, things like that. And there was a sort of a carnival atmosphere at the time, but there was also some stuff happening that quite frankly, some people couldn't explain. Mm-hmm. So it was unnerving. I mean, let's be honest, it was unnerving, but I think a lot of it was sort of in the imagination, maybe, instead of in reality. But hard to know the true facts. Or you just do the best you can, and you dig and find out, and
right.
People who will talk to you at the time, and get what the thing you forget in all this is there was a guy who was stabbed to death. So a couple of things. I told you the weird part about the story, and I left out one important detail. February 16th, 1981. It was a Monday evening when this murder occurred, but it was not the only murder that occurred in the area that night. There was a murder-suicide in Woodbury the same night, and it was a full moon.
Whoa.
So that adds to all the intrigue of what happened. Now, that was number one. And then, this thing went viral because demonic possession was proposed as a legal defense in a court of law. Not guilty by reason of demonic possession. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of back and forth, and what my recollection, and I couldn't find this in my notes last night, but my recollection of what happened was that there's a deadline that in the court of law that you have to enter a defense. And it's, you can say insanity, you can say, self-defense. I mean, there's a couple of reasons why you can say, I'm not guilty of murder. And so that deadline actually had passed when they were trying to get this slotted in, is my recollection of the detail. But Martin Minella, who was hired as the attorney from Waterbury to come in and do this, he was one of the many people talking on the record outside the courtroom, trying to get publicity for this case, and and say we really should not let him be tried for murder because this really was demonic possession, was his point. So I was in court the day that Judge Robert Callahan made the famous decision, and this is actually one of the key parts of the whole case, where he said it was just going to be unscientific, unproductive. There was going to be, and plus, he'd given him the option to say, look, you can withdraw your motion, and I'll let you put in insanity. And Minella said, no, it was demonic possession. And so the judge then issued his ruling saying, well, then it's out. I'm not going to let you.
Were you surprised by that ruling?
I think everybody kind of assumed that it's going to be very tough to bring that in.
Yeah.
Well, Minella, I'm just speculating where he would have went with this. I mean, it's my understanding that the Catholic Church, this is a real thing. They consider possession a real thing and exorcism a real thing. I would imagine he would have brought in
He was going to compel them, and this was part of it. So that day, sitting in the row in front of me in court. Now, everybody today looks at Danbury Court and they think of the one on White Street. That's not the court that was held in. It was on Main Street back in those days, and it's I'm trying to think of the best. The South Main Street, very close to Rogers Park. There's an old building with a dome top. That was the courthouse. That's where we all went. And sitting in front of me were 5 Roman Catholic priests. And allegedly, the 5 Roman Catholic priests who were participating in the exorcisms, or somehow they're representatives, but black robes and everything, right, sitting right in front of me. And soon as it became clear, listening to Judge Callahan, what his ruling was going to be, he didn't finish his ruling before all 5 of them stood up in unison, turned to the right, and marched out of the courtroom, never to be heard from again.
Right.
So, I spoke to...
Probably relieved.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't want any part of this. So when I spoke with Father Francis Virgilac, who was again the demonologist in the Diocese of Bridgeport, I spoke with him by phone, and he said, "Look, he said families turn to us really almost as a last resort on things, and we try and provide counsel." And what he was trying to say in his own way was, "Look, we're not in there, doing chom-dom, gobby-gobby, chasing demons out of people. We're giving them a feeling that the rites of the church, the formal sacramental rites of the church are behind them and with them and give them that level of comfort." So it's not that they've, they do believe there is a devil and a God, in the Catholic Church. So there is some, basis for this. And the exorcism rites are somewhere ensconced in the Bible. So it's not as if there's no foundation for this or no precedent or whatever. But Tourette's syndrome is a condition that affects, ironically, young males about David's age at the time. I'm not saying he had Tourette's. I'm just saying that this is something that happens, and it could have been anything. Who knows? I never met David Glatzel, so I have no idea what happened. And I'm not, I'm just telling you that Ed and Lorraine Warren told me these tapes were made at that time. Debbie Glatzel confirmed that, so that those are the two people who said these tapes actually occurred during these things, and that's where I got that information from.
You have to be, as the reporter, you have to get as much solid information as you can without speculating, without, trying to figure out or you come up with a hypothesis and then try and find that somewhere. You have to sort through all of this. At what point in this are you going, where do I even start? Because you have all of these different elements. You have the church, you have the court, you have these outrageous claims, Where did you begin?
So, as a journalist, your job, if you do it right, is to leave your opinion at the door. Your job is to go in, observe facts, dig up facts, bring them to your audience's attention, and let them... Who was that just walked by? Sorry.
It's Halloween.
The heck was that?
It's a unicorn.
Okay, it's good.
It is Halloween.
Making sure that,
Yeah.
Okay. But your job is to make sure that you are providing the facts. Let the audience decide. Now we're all humans, and and reporters have biases. They do. They have biases, and I was as news director, I was just determining what stories we would cover. For example, that's a bias, right? I mean, you got to be open and honest about this. But if you're doing your job correctly, you recognize your bias. You openly say, listen, I think you're a nutcase. In my personal life, I would not, for instance, vote for you. But you have every right, as for instance, an elected official, to make a statement. So when the attorney for a man on trial for murder, when Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were there, during this process, when Debbie Glatzel, the girlfriend of the guy charged with murder, when they're making public comments, this is public news. And so you report it. You try not to doctor it. You can't doctor it. I mean, you just say this is what they said and let you make up your own mind. And
now the tapes, the sections of audio that we've been playing and the one we're going to play, did you play them years ago? Did you present them to this audience years ago?
Yeah. We played it on I-95. And it was interesting, the reaction. Some people were very upset because they're upsetting tapes. Other people were thinking, is this real? And was it staged? I mean, you got a lot of that. And I just, had to say over and over and over again that these tapes were provided by Ed and Lorraine Warren, confirmed by Debbie Glatzel as being authentic, and it's the best I could do.
Do we want to play
That's up to Mike.
Other clip there?
Well, let's see here. So we played a couple of them. I think maybe what you want to do is, this is maybe the most instructive. It's not the most dramatic, but if you go to cut number 5, I think it is.
Okay.
You'll get the sense of what you're supposed to do at one of these supposed exorcisms.
Okay. Check this out.
Okay, guys.
Help! All right, here, we're here.
I'm trying, guy. I got your arms again. Leave him alone, you swine.
Odie. Right on down there. You okay?
Molly, say, Jesus, I love you. Say it, Molly.
Yeah.
Say it.
Jesus, I love you.
Come on.
Jesus.
All right, so scary.
So if I could just try to simplify this, because I get confused with this case. He's explained it to us 1,000 times.
Right.
So the kid is, the young boy is supposedly or allegedly possessed, right? And then the possession jumps to the accused, and then that is where the contention is that the murder was made through demonic possession.
So it all began in July of 1980 in Newtown, of all places. The families involved were renting a house, and it was July something or other in 1980 when the people who had rented the house before them had left behind a waterbed. This is according to what they told me. And they were all sort of jumping on the waterbed, playing around, having fun, when David suddenly jumped off the bed, for no, apparent reason, but then started acting, in Debbie Glatzel's words, a little bit, unusual. Later, she claims that her and her mother pulled him aside and said, what's up? And that he described that he saw a guy on the waterbed that nobody else saw, who was an elderly, white-haired man with a plaid red shirt, faded blue jeans. And they said, what kind of shoes? And he said, well, he didn't have shoes, he had hooves.
Wow.
And so this was, this is what Debbie told me, and I put that in my notes. Then, from that point on, when Arnie then, supposedly allegedly challenged the devil to leave David and go away, and said, come into me, take me on, because, I'll take care of you. From that point on, then Arnie started exhibiting odd behavior. And then, led to the stabbing death. So, I would just say, you got to go back and look at the facts of the case. And like I said at the very beginning, Alan Bono, the deceased, had a blood alcohol content of 0.341.
Yeah.
Arnie, I believe, was over 0.1. And, so draw your own conclusions, but those are facts.
It's amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. And when you said earlier about the priest saying, if they go ahead with this defense, the judge allows it, you're going to have a lot to write about. That kind of gave you the chills when he said that.
Well, he did. It did. I mean, I was, to put it in context, I was hoping that he was going to say, look, there's absolutely nothing here.
Right.
Go home. There's nothing to see. Right. You could tell he was actually concerned, because this is before the judge had made the decision on whether they were going to allow this as a defense. And so all the speculation was that you were going to hear from the priests who were at these, whatever they were, exorcisms or ceremonies or whatever, that you were going to hear these things. Now, I mean, there were allegations about levitation, head swelling, all sorts of crazy things we were hearing. And that's what I said to the priest. I said, look, these are the kinds of things we're hearing that people have witnessed. And, Lorraine Warren was flat out saying that David's body levitated. And so did you see this? Is there anything here, or can we just, say, look, this is a hoax? This is really nothing to worry about. Come on, community, let's pull together. That was the reason for my questions, was to see, if he could shed any light on this. And then he gave the famous answer of, if this goes to court and we're compelled to testify, you'll have plenty to write about. And, but that by itself, yes, in context sounds very dramatic, and it was. I mean, I must admit, a little chill went up my spine when I heard that. But who knows what he meant by that? Right. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have plenty to write about because there was demonic possession. Yeah. Just could be, listen, a lot of crazy things happened. I mean, so don't make too much out of it, but, in context, it was a little chilling.
Is there anybody you didn't talk to during this whole process?
Yeah, actually, I mean, listen, there were people that, that's one of the tough things as a reporter, right? You've got to respect people's privacy to the best of your ability. I mean, this was a public story. Everybody was talking about it. I mean, like I said, it was international. So I didn't hound people, but if I thought somebody had an important piece of the case, I would talk to them. So I talked to as many Brookfield police officers, for example, as I could. Like I said, I got through to one of the priests who was involved. I tried to get through to Dr. Stephen Balsam, and I did, and he would not confirm that the patient, because there's patient confidentiality, but he was the expert in Tourette syndrome. So I tried to do my best to cover what I could. And, and at some point in time, then it goes to court, and you just report on what's said in open court, and that was it.
Lou, you and I couldn't be investigative reporters because we don't like even talking to anybody.
No, and I want to phone. I need to wrap things up when I need to wrap them up, and that's not how these things work. I'm like, enough already, guys. I'm just going to write whatever I want.
Right.